Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to do a non-spoiler review for the original Sevenwaters Trilogy by Juliet Marilliers. This is an adult historical fantasy set primarily in 9th century Ireland with a very strong connection to nature. The first book, Daughter of the Forest, is a fairy tale retelling of the fairy tale of the Six Swans by Hans Christian Andersen, but the second and the third book, titled Son of the Shadows and Child of the Prophecy, aren't. Although both of them have a very fairy tale-esque feel, so I would say that in general the entire trilogy is either a fairy tale retelling / a new modern fairy tale. If you like these kinds of books, then definitely keep watching. I enjoyed this trilogy immensely. Daughter of the Forest is my favorite book of all time, so I do hope that I can make you excited, but as always I will try to give you as much information as possible for you to make up your own mind whether or not you think this would be something for you. In each of the books in this trilogy, we follow a female member of the Sevenwaters family, and in the first book that is Sorcha. Sorcha is the seventh child of the Lord of Seven Waters, and she has 6 older brothers. The story begins when Sorcha's father remarries, but unbeknownst to him, he is actually bewitched by this new woman, and she is an evil sorceress that wants to draw power to herself. Sorcha and her brothers tries to intervene, but as a result, the evil sorceress turns the 6 brothers into swans. Sorcha is able to escape to the forest that surrounds Sevenwaters, and there she meets the fair folk. They have their own interests at heart as to why they want to stop the evil sorceress, so they tell her how she can reverse this curse. But this is a very difficult task, and this is one that she must carry alone. So while doing so, she suffers a lot of hardship, she suffers a lot of loneliness, and she is taken away from everything that she holds dear and everything that is familiar to her. So the first book is definitely Sorcha's journey and how she is able to endure a lot of hurt and a lot of loneliness because she has so much love for her brothers and she wants to reverse this curse. In the second book you have a similar story, but there Liaden is the main character and she also has a problem that she needs to overcome. You also have this interference with the fair folk. And in the third book you follow Fanye with, again, a sort of similar build-up. So each of these books definitely has their own story. There is a very clear beginning, a very clear ending, with the story of the main character at heart. So because of that, you don't really have middle book syndrome, because again, even the middle book has a very clear beginning and ending. But in the background, you do have an overarching plot where the war between Britain and Ireland is central. You have, of course, Ireland, who wants to preserve the old ways, they want to preserve their sacred places, and they want to preserve the fair folk, and then you have Britain, who are endangering all of this. In this, of course, the fair folk have some intermittent appearances. They have a very strong role in the background, and you have also this evil sorceress that sometimes pops up throughout. I really enjoyed this trilogy. I loved the first book most of all, but even the second and the third one were really fantastic in my opinion. So plot-wise, I did enjoy the story and how Juliet Marilliers told this one. The books are told in first person from the POV of the main character that we are following in that specific book, and in past tense. So this really gives you the feeling that these females are telling you their childhood memories and childhood stories around a campfire, which really adds to the fairy tale-esque atmosphere. I do know that most fairy tales are told from third person in a sort of all-knowing perspective, and this isn't the case here, but because of Juliet Marilliers' writing style, you still have that fairy tale-esque feel, and because the first person, you are very connected to the character and are almost feeling like you are part of her, which really added to my enjoyment. I do know that some people don't like first person, that's something that they need to get adjusted to, because in adult fantasy that's not really what's used most of the time, but I think if you can get used to it, that this is really a gem and it can really add to your experience because it is so close to the character that you are following. These 3 books are definitely very slow paced, make no mistake, and especially the first book. I think that it takes around 150 pages before the actual plot starts going, and even then it's quite slow. I personally enjoy that, but I do know that again, that's not for everyone. The pacing does go up in the second and especially the third book, where the overarching plot is most important and where you have a grand finale at the ending, but still I wouldn't call these fast paced in any type of sense. And I also think that if you find the first one too slow, that you won't like the second or the third one. What I do like about Juliet Marilliers' writing style as well is that she draws a lot of analogies to nature. And this again adds to the setting, and this is something that she's very consistent in throughout the entire trilogy. So I will just read a very small passage to give you an idea of what I mean. My feet will tread soft as a deer in the forest. My mind will be clear as water from the sacred well. My heart will be strong as a great oak. My spirit will spread an eagle's wings and fly forth. This is the way of truth. So as you can hear, pretty whimsical with a very close connection to nature. This is definitely not to everyone's cup of tea. I really like it, but you should know for yourself if this is something that you like reading as well. Something that Juliet Marilliers also does quite a lot in her books, and which is also present in this trilogy, is that she lets her characters tell a folklore story to each other that always has a connection to the main story later on. I really enjoy stories within a story, but I do know that some people don't really enjoy that, so please be aware that that's definitely present here. Although, of course, it's only a very small part, and it's definitely not, throughout the story that you will read tons of smaller stories within, but it's definitely one or two in each book. I enjoy that, but you must make up for yourself whether or not that is something for you. Now, as far as world building goes, as I said before, this is an historical fantasy set in medieval Ireland for the most part, so there isn't some grand fantasy world building going on here. You do have different locations because all main characters do travel in their own story, but of course you have one central element, which is Sevenwaters. This is a very confound establishment because you have the forest that is around it. So I really like how Juliet Marilliers can give you that feeling and that atmosphere of being there, because in the third book, for example, you start at the seaside and the feeling is much more open. So she really is able to make you feel like you are with the characters at that location, which I do enjoy. For fantastical elements, as I said before, this is a very strong connection to nature, and it starts with the forest that surrounds Sevenwaters, which is actually a protector of the people that live there, and which gives you also the feeling that Sevenwaters is almost completely separated from the rest of the world. In that forest then you have, of course, the fair folk, and they stay these mythical beings that you don't completely understand, because of course you are looking from them through, in the beginning, Sorka's eyes, and throughout the story through other people's eyes who don't really understand them completely. However, you do get some information about the folklore and about the history of these magical beings, which I quite enjoyed as well. In terms of magic system that the characters themselves have, this is very minimal, especially in the first two books. You have Sorka in the first one and also Liaden in the second one, who are able to communicate mind to mind with some other members of their family, most of the time some of their brothers. So of course this means that they don't need to be in the same room in order to communicate with them. They have this kind of special bond. And this is of course a type of magic that they have, but this isn't very outspoken. This is also not that important for the plot in the most parts, but it does add to the general feeling of magic. Liaden and also one of the brothers of Sorka have the ability to see visions of the future, but again they don't really use this to interfere with the plot or with the general story, because they don't want to. It's very dangerous to do this. So it doesn't really have a big impact on the story either. And then you have one of Sorka's brothers who is a druid, so he is very connected to nature and he can use this to alter the elements around him, but in a very small sense. The amount of magic does ramp up in the third book, because then we have a main character, Vanya, who does have magical abilities, and in a greater extent than the previous main characters. She is sort of a sorceress at base. She still needs to learn a lot, but that's definitely a difference from the first two books. And in the third book you also have more interference with the fair folk and with other beings, because you have the main plot that is going to an end with a very grand finale as at the end, as I said before. So the most magic that you will get is definitely at the third one. But if you are looking for a hard magic system with a lot of action involved as well, where the magic plays a very important role in the story, then that's not something that you're going to find here. Here you more have that feeling of magic with a lot of mythical beings that are present in the story, which is true for most fairy tales. So if you like that, then you know what to expect in this book. Then, last but not least, I do want to discuss the characters, and what I really enjoy here is that we follow 3 very distinct female lead characters that are very strong in their own way. What I often read when I read about strong female characters is that the writer has made them very physically strong and gives them more masculine attributes. And that's fine, I like reading about those kinds of females, but when that's the only type of strong female that you can write, I do wonder where the diversity is, and especially if you then have other females who are not physically strong and then immediately they're weak and they need to be protected and they need to be taken care of because they can't do anything themselves. This is something that Juliet Marilliers doesn't do. She writes 3 very strong females without them being physically strong per se. You have Sorka in the first book, who is very strong because she is able to adjust herself in any situation and she kind of goes along with the stream, never losing her main focus and never losing her goal and her task that is at hand. Then in the second book you have Liaden, and she is more the typical kind of strength where she does stand up for herself. She does go actually against the stream for her loved ones and to keep close what she holds dear, even though this might not be in the best interest of the fair folk, for instance. And then in the third book you have Fanya, and she is actually a little bit different because she doesn't really believe in her own strength. She has a very difficult family situation, and it would be a spoiler to go too deep into that, so I won't do that. But she has some family members that hold her down and that use her for their own advantage. And what she actually doesn't realize is that she doesn't need these people. She's strong in her own way, and she gives them the strength of holding her down because she doesn't believe in her own strength. And that's a journey that she goes through in the third book specifically. So you have these 3 people, very different, but still very enjoyable to look at them and to watch their character arc. When we then take a deeper look into character interactions, in the first book you have, of course, Sorka with her brothers, and that's a very interesting relationship to look at. You have the 6 brothers, and all 6 of them are very distinct. You have the idealist who wants to make the world a better place. You have the explorist who wants to go and explore, wants to travel the world. You have the fighter, you have the druid, so all of them are very distinct and all of them love Sorka and have a very special relationship with her, and Sorka in turn loves them as well. And that's very nice because most of the time when a relationship is being studied and being developed, it's almost always a romantic relationship, so just to have this relationship between brothers and sisters was very nice to read about and very wholesome. Then in general, what's very important here as well is that, especially for the first one, there is a very important trigger warning, actually only for the first one. And that is a trigger warning for sexual assault. This sexual assault is very emotional because you're, of course, in the mind of the person who is experiencing this. It is very brutal, it is very graphic as well, and you do have a lot of repercussions later on. That is actually something that I do enjoy. When you are going to write this into a story, it needs to mean something. If you only have the traumatic event and then nothing that happens later on, you don't have really character development because of that, then it's just for shock value in my opinion. So here you do have that, but that does mean that you are being reminded of that event multiple times throughout the story after that event. So if this is a very strong trigger warning for you, then I would advise not reading the first book. Just read the synopsis somewhere and start in the second one, because as I said, it is pretty heartfelt because it's so emotional how it is being described. Now, what I do like about that is that it is very important for the character of Sorka. And you do see that this have repercussions for her, and that is something that if you are into character-driven stories, you will enjoy, in my opinion. What is also very important for all 3 of the stories is that there is a very strong romance in all of them. And this is actually pretty to the forefront. The first one, Daughter of the Forest, has a romance that is my favorite of all time. It was very slow burn. I loved the male interest in this one as well. You get to know him very well. You see that he's a very good man. It's a very realistic relationship and very satisfying as well. So if you like romance, then this is definitely one that you should read. In the second one, you also have a little bit of slow relationship, but it's not that slow burning as the first one. I also enjoyed it. It wasn't as good as the first one, but there's nothing wrong with it either, and it was actually pretty enjoyable. And then in the third one, I did have some problems with it. It's not that something was wrong, but I didn't really enjoy the male interest in this one. And it was actually a childhood friend, so you don't have that slow burn that I enjoy most of the time. But in general, all three of the romances in this trilogy are good. None of them are awkward or, insta-love or anything in that sense. What is also very nice for the characters is that, of course, in each book you follow women of the next generation, but that also means that some of the other characters that you have seen in the previous book pop up again. And that's nice because even though the story isn't focused on them, you still see them and see how their lives progressed after their own story, which I found very enjoyable, and it was just fun to look like, oh, there's Sorka. It was a little bit wholesome as well. So if you like those kinds of stories where they pop up in the sidelines sometimes, then that's definitely something that you will see here as well. I think that the only characters that aren't that well fleshed out in these books are the evil sorceress, but she does get a little bit more background throughout the entire trilogy, even though it's still minimal, but that is also, again, very fairy tale-esque, where the antagonist doesn't really get that much characterization. It's just an evil person and that's it. And then you also have the fair folk, where you don't know that much about. Again, that does increase a little bit throughout, and especially in the third book you get a little bit more insight about them, but they stay mythical beings, and that's actually what I enjoy, and that's what should be in fairy tale stories, in my opinion. That's what makes them enjoyable, that it's not too well explained and that there is some mystery involved as well. So these were the most important things that I wanted to say about this trilogy. For my personal enjoyment, I loved the first one most because I enjoyed the main character, Sorka, here most of all of the three. I enjoyed the romance most, and this was the most character focused and the slowest of the three, which in general I enjoy. But I've heard actually a lot of people say that the third one was their favorite because you have actually a main character that has some magical abilities. You have the magical elements that are strongest here, you have a grand finale, and here the plot is more to the forefront. So that's just your own cup of tea, what you like best. However, if you don't like the first one, don't continue reading because you would not like the second and the third one either, in my opinion. And I think if you do like the first one, that the second and the third one will also be your cup of tea. Now, so in general, I would recommend this trilogy if you enjoy fairy tale-esque stories, if you enjoy slow burns with a very atmospherical read, where the characters are the main focus of the book, and you also have a little bit of romance. On the other hand, if you want a hard magic system where the magic is very important for the progression of the plot, and if you want the plot to be at the forefront, then I wouldn't really recommend these stories. But in general, I don't think that I would recommend most fairy tale-esque books. So take that for what you will. I hope that you have enjoyed this review. Please let me know if you want to pick up this trilogy, or maybe if you've already read it, let me know what you thought of it, and I'll see you next time. I hope you have a nice day. Bye!